A 4-day meeting and a 5-year task. What does it mean to you? A long-awaited meeting of the 20th CPC Central Committee due to an end Thursday with the adoption of a resolution on further deepening reforms in China. The third plenum, held once every 5 years, took place this week in Beijing, and the resolution spells out a 5-year task to comprehensively deepen reforms. The idea is that by 2035, China will have finished building a high-standard socialist market economy in all respects, further improve the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics, generally modernized China's system and capacity for governance, and basically realize socialist modernization. We will explain these terms for you, don't worry. But what's crucial in this meeting at that juncture? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Manuel Menendez, Chairman and CEO of the real estate company MCM Group Holdings. From Beijing by Zoon, Ahmed, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. From Brisbane, Australia by Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor at Queensland University of Technology, and here in the studio by Professor Xia Lu at the School of Marxism Studies of Renmin University of China. The warmest welcome to all of you. Warwick, let me go to you first. The adopted resolution is called, and it's a mouthful, the resolution of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China on further deepening reform comprehensively to advance China's modernization. What problem does this document want to address, and what's the rationale behind it?
I think firstly we need to recognise that it's a consolidation of a pathway that was established a little bit over 10 years ago, beginning in about 2012. And it is a recognition that in implementing the process of reform and modernisation with Chinese characteristics, that progressively challenges are confronted which need to be addressed. Specifically, the challenges that are being confronted really go to, I guess, what I would describe as the blockages right across the social and economic systems that prohibit the fully unleashing, if you will, of the capacity of people and the capacity of productive forces to transform living standards and to create a more prosperous country. So whilst it is a mouthful, the summary really, from my perspective, is a consolidation and a recognition that the processes of reform never stop, that there are always hurdles and blockages that need to be addressed, and it is always about improving the flow of the system as a whole.
And probably as the time changes as well. Professor Xia, because we have been hearing the comprehensively deepening reform term as a buzzword in Chinese political life over the past decade or less actually, but what does this latest resolution entail? Does this signal a new stage, a new phase, and why now?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think this is very significant in two ways. First of all, we could see that in the 46 or more than 4 decades of China's reform, there are 3 significant historical points in this kind of comprehensive deepening reform. The first one is 1978, the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee, and that was the starting point of the reform. And the second one is the third plenum of the 18th Central Committee, which was held in almost 10 years ago, 2013. That was kind of ushering the new age or the new era of the socialism with Chinese characteristics. And then it is the third plenum of the 20th Central Committee. In my opinion, actually, first of all, it reveals the continuity of the Communist Party of China, or the CPC's kind of the governance or the philosophy, governing philosophy of the CPC CPC toward China's reform, we could see that the term, not only in the comprehensive deepened reform, but also the socialism with Chinese characteristics, these two keywords actually, we could see that consistently and become the keyword of the general line of Chinese reform. And the second, it more important is that it reveals the methodology of governing China. Actually, its a methodological significance should be highlighted, not only in the third plenum of the 20th Central Committee, but also in the 20th National Congress, the report to the National Congress of the CPC 2 years ago. And particularly, this methodological or methodology focuses on the systematical thinking or systematical, management. It focuses not only on priority, that priority is economic reform, but also on the balance between, or actually the balance among economic field, political field, social governance, cultural governance, even the ecological governance, even, the improvement of the party's leadership. So all these kind of factors are integrated into this comprehensive deepened reform. So we could see that's the methodological, highlight here.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Let me go to Zoon, and for the people who are not very familiar with the Chinese governance and the evolvement and the evolution of it, what will be changed as we roll into the next few years, and what will not? What main areas that may be affected?
Thank you, Lucian, firstly, for having me. I think I'll agree with actually what both previously Mr. Powell and Professor Shah have emphasized. In a way, this is obviously a method. The document in its wording is quite philosophical, which it is supposed to be. I think people who are not familiar with the Chinese governance system, or how, in what a sophisticated way the government really approaches very practical challenges. And then in the weeks and months to come, we will see the practical implementation. That said, I think what this document really, first of all, this meeting, this plenary is coming at a time right after, with a 6, 7, 8 months delay, of course, but at a time of very unique external and domestic challenges to the economy, and also that means new opportunities. And I think first and foremost, what we can read from the document is that there will be a continuation of those priorities. There is a realization that security and economy are deeply interconnected. There is a realization and a commitment being stated to green urbanization, to green development. There's also a prioritization of rural and urban balancing of economic reform. That means we're looking for growth, but growth with true development. Growth that is addressing the existing gaps, growth that is receptive towards, what are the unique challenges. And I would say, in various, in the different aspects, if we look at the economic, political, and social, I think the major key point that needs to be taken from this is that there is a continuation of that commitment. There is a continuation to recognize that with these challenges come new opportunities as well.
Yeah.
So, for example, there is a
Zoon,
new quality
yeah,
productive
we'll get to the specifics, and we'll get to the specifics in just a moment. Let me go to Manny. Manny, with what kind of expectations are you watching the decisions that come out of this meeting, and how significant is this for you? Because you have been living in China for decades, and you witnessed, China's reform and opening up since the very beginning. What does this new phase mean to you?
I think the most important thing in business is confidence and predictability. And I think this follows since 1978 and the opening and the opening period. It follows a step-by-step approach of China in a very pragmatic way to look at review, and then look at reflection, and then look at reforms. So when China tries something in the beginning, they tried it in the opening period, they review it, they look at issues, and then they try to fix it. So this session is a reflection going back all the way back to the opening period, and improving and improving and improving, and taking these blockages, as was mentioned earlier, out of the equation. So I think it's fantastic, and I think it's wonderful, and I believe from the business community side, predictability and builds confidence, especially when we have a bit of an unsettled world right now. Confidence is very, very important.
Yeah. Well, let's delve into the nitty-gritty and take a look at the wordings, which are very carefully constructed. For instance, the overall objectives of these reform are said to be twofold. One is to continue improving and developing the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and the other is modernizing China's system and capacity for governance. Professor Xia, let me go to you because you study these terms. For the layman out there, especially who don't understand Chinese, what exactly does it mean, China's system and capacity for governance, for instance?
Well, actually, these twofold, or we can say the two perspectives to, let's say, a future goal of this resolution, well, stand for two important factors. The first important factor is the target. You know, the Chinese leadership, not only 46 years ago in the beginning of the Chinese reform, but also now in the new era or looking for this kind of a new stage. We could say that they always have a very clear, target and a clear mind, or cool-minded. So they know what they do, they know what they did, they know what they are going to do. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that they know how to do. And they put, so much, attention, so much energy in developing very, very practical and issue-oriented methodology or approach. So that is, I could say, one of the component to the Chinese characteristics, because if we go to the other...
so it's centered on solving problems.
Right.
Addressing issues.
Yeah, and also one more thing. This philosophy is not about this abstract kind of jargon or those kind of concepts. This philosophy is more of a practical thing. It's more of a issue-oriented. You know the target and you know how to do. So these two things combined together means what success, right? Yeah.
Warwick, what is your take? These two objectives, seemingly very abstract and very big, modernization with Chinese characteristics and Chinese system and capacity for governance. Can you translate into languages that, for instance, people in Australia would be able to understand? What are they trying to accomplish on those two fronts?
I think what they're trying to accomplish is to continue to bring into play the institutions and the practices that build proximity between those responsible for making decisions at the highest of levels with the feedback that is being provided from people on the ground. So it's a circular process, if you will, or a dialectical process of backwards and forwards where information is being gathered and being passed up and down so that decisions can be made and continually adjusted to the circumstances on the ground. I think that's actually the key issue here. It's about the ways in which the issues that are being confronted on the ground are aligned with a macro analytical framework that allows the addressing of the challenges and the opportunities of Chinese modernization at a macro level, but in a way that makes a difference at the grassroots.
Manny, what is your feel? Because in the twofold objectives, Chineseness is pretty much stressed, socialism with Chinese characteristics and China's system and capacity for governance. Do you think this is going to make China more different than its Western partners? Or how is that Chineseness going to be relatable and investable, if I may, for their counterparts in Western developed systems?
No, I think China has always tried to be very straightforward with what the rules and regulations are in the marketplace. So for a foreign investor to come here, the rules and regulations are very straightforward and published, and you need to understand them. I think what this reform is doing is, for example, with the negative list, to reduce the negative list, make it more accessible for foreign investment, whether it's from the U.S. or elsewhere, to come into the market. And step by step, China has been able to do that. It's not an instantaneous process because the journey that China has taken no one in the world has ever taken to this scale. And I think that's sometimes what's missing in the equation and the understanding. Taking 800 million people out of poverty, for example, creating 96% of all the business enterprises are now private sector enterprises in China. That never existed in 1978. This journey has placed China in a path that has been unknown to much of the world, and even in China. So this internal reflection process that comes through this third plenum is this constant focus on improving. But I think we should never miss the key point. The key point is, why is China doing this? Because they want to improve the lives of the people. This is the main point. They want to improve the lives of the people. That's when they talk about China's leadership. President Xi talks about common prosperity. So
yeah, Manny,
okay.
Let me interrupt you there, because you mentioned
Yeah,
very
please.
point. You have lived in China, you've seen, changes all along, but you firmly believe that the goal, the objective of the Communist Party of China is to improve the lives of its people. And that would be very different from what a lot of people would read on the international press, which is all about consolidating power or, global ambitions and replacing the United States and so on. What makes you so firm about the goal of the CPC is to serve the interests of the people?
Because working with Chinese people are peaceful, benevolent society. No one's interested in having conflict with the world. I think our systems are different, and I think we should embrace the differences. We may not agree, but we have to have a path of agreeing to disagree. And I think that has been lost in the last few years of respectful disagreements and looking at the things that are difficult and working on them, and those things that are common areas where we can work together on climate change, healthcare, food security, and many other things. I think is 90% of the equation. I get confidence from working with the Chinese people.
Yeah, great. Well, let's focus back on the resolution and the plans ahead. Now, the reform is said to be focusing on 7 areas, and I'm going to list that. It includes building a high-standard socialist market economy, advancing whole process people's democracy, developing a strong socialist culture in China, raising the people's quality of life, building a beautiful China, advancing the Peace for China initiative to a higher level, which is, to increase the safety and, security of society, and improving the party's capacity for leadership and long-term governance. Zoon, let me come to you. What does that mean to you? Which ones caught your attention?
Well, Yushin, actually, being someone, I've also lived in China for almost over 9 years now. And I would say that, all of these priorities, these 7 aspects that have been emphasized in the plenary, are actually very central to China's development that we're observing. So I would say, of course, at the core of it, we observe that it is a very people-centric approach. There is a recognition of how deeply intertwined different aspects of development need to be. And for me in particular, I think it's interesting to see that building a high standard socialist market economy, all of that, that means essentially that we are going to balance market interests and society's interests and see how maybe an environment can be created where there is positive competitiveness. There is improved productivity, efficiency, capacity, but at the same time, we are ensuring benefits to people on the ground level. There are mechanisms in place to ensure that the benefits of that will be more balanced. And I will also mention that, raising the people's quality of life, of course, that has been a core priority. Anyone who has been to China recently, traveled to different parts of the country, will see how drastically people's lives have changed, how well informed an average Chinese person, even in a very remote part of China, so to speak, is of the importance of the environment, of the importance of the people's contribution to the overall development. I think that's also a very important aspect. And I would say that Quality of governance, very important. Lastly, quality of governance. What are the existing mechanisms, structures, policies, perspectives actually delivering?
Yeah.
This is very important, especially for developing countries to observe.
Warwick, what do you make of these goals? They seem to be quite a lot. Can China do all of that at the same time? What about the local levels? Can China make sure that these lofty goals, big goals, can really be translated into concrete policies and implemented at the grassroots levels?
Look, I'm pretty confident that they can, and in large part that's based on 40 years of observed experience now, where macro ambitions, as ambitious as they in a sense appear to be, are effectively translated into concrete initiatives on the ground. What these 7 broad objectives also tell us is also a sense in which the focus on development is holistic. The emphasis is on continually adjusting to achieve the right balances between these different aspects and avoid the kind of zero-sum either-or frameworks that often find their way into public policy thinking in the West. So it is about continual adaptation, continual fine-tuning, so as to achieve this balance between these 7 dimensions. I think that we'll see some very interesting experiments on the ground that many people will learn from. Some of them will be more successful than others, but that's the beauty of an adaptive political economy.
And it's quite audacious as well. I mean, Professor Shah, what do you think for an economy of this size of a country of 1.4 billion to undertake such audacious reforms? I think there's quite a lot of responsibility and risks, of course, that may come with it. Where does the courage come from?
Well, yeah, it comes from the people's support. So I actually agree with what Ms. Zhu just said, the people-oriented or people-centered philosophy among all these 7 factors. Actually, well, let's take a little bit time to get back to the history of the mass line. Mass line actually has become the general line or the kind of the basic method of the Communist Party of China, not only in the reform period, but also in the, in a revolutionary period, right? So this description of a general line is everything should come from the mass to the mass, and everything should go back to the mass, and also the government.
You mean the people?
The people,
basically.
of course, the people, yes, the mass, the 群众. So what kind of factors, or what kind of the famous meaning does we kind of remind of, or what is similar to this kind of mass line? Well, should it be, or is it a little bit similar to what President Abraham Lincoln's by the people, of the people, for the people? Actually, the deep code of this kind of 2 description is the same, if I may say so. However, the most important thing is to know who is the people, or what kind of factors is the main component of the people. That may be the difference between China and the Western world. So here we could say that not only economic affair, but also political governance, but also the cultural management and the social governance. All this kind of general line going through or running through the 7 factors is the people-oriented philosophy or people-oriented, let's say, methodology. And with that being said, all this kind of general design could be translated into the concrete policy or the 300 policies all related or instated in this kind of resolution. That might be the next 5 years plan, but not only next 5 years plan, but also the plan for 2035. So with the support of the people, with the support of the mass, with the the mass base or the base of the mass, all these kind of resolutions, all these kind of methods could be translated into the real policy or concrete policies.
People certainly are eagerly awaiting more details coming out, the content of the resolution. Manny, there are some people in the West, in mainstream media, for instance, who are voicing some kind of concern about China's economy going possibly more in the planned direction. Is that what you're sensing from the wording of the communique? For instance, it does talk about regulating effectively the economy. When it talks about the economy, it's a market economy, but it's a socialist market economy. Do you think China is going in the more, tightly controlled plan mode, or a real effective balancing of the private sector and the public sector?
No, I agree with what Warwick said. I think it's a holistic approach. I don't think they're trying to make things more difficult. I think China's trying to make things more open and transparent. It takes time. So I don't think it's a closing. I think it's a clarification of rules and regulations so that people in business, whether they're foreign or domestic, can understand what the regulations are and then how to use them. I'm very confident that China will proceed and grow at 5% GDP or more. I think there are some headwinds, but the headwinds are created not only from internal factors, but external factors. And I'm very confident in China's ability to experiment and try things and then see how to adjust them going forward.
The document actually has this line. It says that opening up is a defining feature of Chinese modernization, a defining feature. And it says that we must remain committed to the basic state of policy of opening up to the outside world and continue to promote reform through opening up. Zoon, what do you make of the kind of emphasis that's put to opening up and reform? Is it just rhetoric, or are we going to see more concrete measures to make an even leveler playing field for Chinese and domestic players, for Chinese and overseas players?
Well, I think for me, as someone who's also understanding the Belt and Road Initiative and seeing how much really the global economy, especially developing countries, we're looking forward to this plenary to understand what kind of signals we can interpret for deepening the collaboration, cooperation under BRI or other partnerships. I think this is a very important message at this point, because let's not forget that 2-3 years ago in particular, there was a Western media or other reports coming out saying that now China will probably withdraw. China's interest in international cooperation, trade, investments will be reduced. But I think that's quite the opposite of what we are seeing. And I'll also mention that based on what we know so far, we can predict that China might even propose more proactive measures to see how further these cooperations, outbound investment, can also be appropriately facilitated. And why I say that, because China is the only country that even hosts the CIIE, the International Import-Export. So China has an interest to see what are the most efficient ways to cooperate. And the BRI is a very important mechanism for that. There's also a mention of China's deep commitment to economic globalization and inclusivity, fairness and justice, representation in institutions. So I think this, the plenary is definitely signaling a very positive, way forward for inclusivity, for deeper cooperation, and especially, I would say, for countries that are keen to benefit from China's economic development and expertise.
Warwick, let me put this question to you, which is quite interesting to a lot of people, and a lot of myth is created around it, is the decision-making process. How does such a resolution come about? And compared with the previous third plenum, it's quite some changes, new concepts, new ideas. How is such a decision made by the party? How it's deliberated within the party, come to a consensus, but also how are the general public and other sectors, stakeholders involved?
Look, this is actually a really important point about how decisions ultimately are arrived at by the leadership in China. And it's done through a continual process of engagement and dialogue. As I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges of governing large countries and with complex challenges is to make sure that the distance between those making the decisions and those being affected by decisions is continually kept close. And when leadership and the masses become removed from each other, you start to get significant misalignments. And Chinese institutions of governance and practice are really focused on making sure that that distance gets closer, not further apart, that the dialogue is backwards and forwards and continually being refined through engagement, listening, experimentation, learning by doing.
All
Right.
right.
So it's always about, so it's very, very feet on the ground, if you will.
Yeah, it's the trust of the people is the legitimacy of the governance. Many thanks to my guests, Warwick Powell, Manuel Menendez, Zoon Ahmed Khan, and Professor Xia Lu. Thank you very much. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thank you for watching. You've got The Point.